Here we have the list of the systemic arteries and veins that you need to know. Initially, you see the systemic blood flow superior to the heart, and there's the list of the systemic arteries, and then a list of the systemic veins. I'm going to be going through all the arteries with you first, and then the veins. So remember that arteries carry blood away from the heart. The pulmonary arteries were deoxygenated. However, the systemic arteries are oxygenated. So they carry blood that is high in oxygen and low in carbon dioxide. And so here is the lab manual. I'm going to be going back and forth between the lab manual and then the labeling document that you have. I do want to remind you of something that you see here. This is showing the systemic arteries and veins, but what we really see here is what's happening at the capillary bed. So if we have a systemic artery, it is going to be oxygenated. So it's going to be red, indicating that it's high in oxygen. That oxygen is going to be delivered through the bloodstream to our body tissue cells, where it will be exchanged at the capillaries. It's the capillaries which are the exchange vessels, meaning this is where oxygen will leave the blood to be delivered to our body tissue cells, and where carbon dioxide will be picked up. It's also where we will exchange nutrients for waste products as well. So anyway, as the blood is flowing this direction and through the artery and into ultimately the capillaries, oxygen will leave the capillaries to be delivered to the tissue cells. They will use the oxygen to produce ATP. The carbon dioxide produced by those tissue cells will get put back in. The carbon dioxide will actually diffuse from high to low concentration into the bloodstream, into the capillaries here, to be transported via the systemic veins back to the heart, and then ultimately back to the lungs, where we will then drop that carbon dioxide up and pick up the oxygen. So what you're seeing below this, then, there is the picture of the systemic arteries on the left, because they're red, and the systemic veins on the right. Veins carry blood towards the heart, and arteries carry blood away from the heart. We are going to look at these diagrams, however, in smaller chunks. So we'll look at the vessels, the blood vessels of the head, of the arms, then in the abdominal cavity, in the pelvic cavity, and then in the legs. So to begin with, going back to our list, here we see arteries beginning with the ascending aorta and working all the way down to the ulnar artery, which is going to be all the way out in the lower arm. So in the lab manual, this diagram that you see here, the heart has been removed, so all we're seeing then is the aorta here. This would be the ascending aorta, the aortic arch, and then the descending aorta. However, we can refer to this as the thoracic aorta here while we're in the thoracic cavity. The diaphragm would be located down here. There are three branches that come off the top of the aorta. This is the brachiocephalic trunk on the far right side. It's actually on our left, but it's on the right side of the aorta. The middle branch here carries blood up into the head. That is the left common carotid artery. And then here we see the left subclavian. That's the farthest branch on the left side of the aorta. It does travel behind the clavicle, hence the name left subclavian artery. On the other side, here's the right subclavian artery. You can see it passing behind the clavicle. As that blood travels through the subclavian, it will ultimately end up in the axillary artery. The axillary artery is labeled for us here. Remember that axillary means under the arm or the armpit region. From the axillary artery, blood will pass into the brachial artery. There's your label. The brachial artery is in the upper arm. That's the artery that we are generally determining our blood pressure in when we wrap that pressure cuff around the upper arm. The brachial artery then comes down, passes in front of the elbow, and then will branch. It will branch into the vessel that will be on the thumb side. So right there adjacent to the radius is the radial artery. And then on the pinky side, next to the ulna, is the ulnar artery.